In December 2023, a federal judge ordered the release of nearly 1,000 pages of sealed court documents. These weren't ordinary legal files. They contained the names of some of the world's most powerful people, billionaires, politicians, royalty, and celebrities, all connected to a man who had been dead for 4 years. His name was Jeffrey Epstein, and the documents revealed something far more disturbing than anyone had imagined. Not just a story of one man's crimes, but a decades-long conspiracy that exploited hundreds of young women while hiding in plain sight among the global elite. This is the story of how it happened, how it was hidden, and what the release of these files finally revealed. Who was Jeffrey Epstein? To understand the Epstein files, you first need to understand the man himself, and that's harder than it sounds. Even today, much of Jeffrey Epstein's early life remains shrouded in mystery and contradiction. Born in Brooklyn in 1953, Epstein came from a middle-class family. He was bright but unremarkable. He attended Cooper Union and NYU, but never graduated from either. His first job was teaching calculus and physics at the prestigious Dalton School in Manhattan, despite having no college degree. It was 1974, and he was just 21 years old. But here's where the story gets interesting. At Dalton, Epstein met the father of one of his students, Ace Greenberg, the CEO of Bear Stearns, one of Wall Street's most powerful investment banks. Within 2 years, Epstein had left teaching and landed a job at Bear Stearns. He was good at it, very good. By 1980, he had become a limited partner, a remarkable achievement for someone with no formal finance training. But just a year later, Epstein left Bear Stearns under unclear circumstances. Some reports suggest he was forced out for violations of securities rules. The mystery billionaire. What happened next is where Jeffrey Epstein's story becomes almost mythical. In 1982, he founded his own financial management firm, J. Epstein & Company. But this wasn't a normal investment firm. Epstein claimed he would only take clients who were billionaires and who would give him total discretion over their assets. Think about that for a moment. A man with no college degree, fired from his previous job, somehow convinced multiple billionaires to hand him complete control of their fortunes. Who were these clients? Epstein never said. To this day, only one has ever been publicly confirmed. Leslie Wexner, the founder of Victoria's Secret and The Limited, and at the time, one of the wealthiest men in America. Wexner gave Epstein something extraordinary: power of attorney over his entire financial empire. Epstein managed Wexner's money, bought his properties, and sat on the board of the Wexner Foundation. In 1989, Epstein even purchased Wexner's New York mansion, a 21,000 square foot townhouse on Manhattan's Upper East Side, valued at over $50 million, for a price that has never been publicly disclosed. But here's the question no one could answer. What did Epstein actually do for all this money and power? Former associates described him as brilliant at reading people and situations, but they couldn't point to any specific financial achievements. There were no public investment funds, no notable trades, no track record that would justify his billionaire status. Yet by the 1990s, Jeffrey Epstein was flying on private jets, partying with presidents and princes, and had amassed an estimated fortune of over $500 million. The truth, as we would later learn, was that Epstein's real business had nothing to do with finance. Building a criminal enterprise. While Epstein was cultivating his image as a mysterious financial genius, he was building something else entirely, a sophisticated system of sexual abuse that operated for more than 2 decades. The pattern was always the same. Young women, many still in high school, would be recruited with promises of modeling opportunities, money, or simply a chance to meet someone powerful who could help their careers. They would be brought to one of Epstein's properties, the Manhattan townhouse, his Palm Beach estate, his private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands known as Little St. James, his ranch in New Mexico, or his apartment in Paris. What happened next has been documented in hundreds of victim statements, police reports, and court filings. The young women would be told to give Epstein a massage. The massage would become sexual. They would be paid, usually a few $100s. Then they would be asked to recruit others. For each new girl they brought, they'd get more money. It was a pyramid scheme, but instead of selling products, victims were recruiting more victims. And Epstein didn't operate alone. Court documents identified several key participants in what prosecutors would later call his enterprise. Most prominent was Ghislaine Maxwell, the British socialite and daughter of disgraced media tycoon Robert Maxwell. Victim after victim described Maxwell as Epstein's right hand, recruiting young women, training them on what Epstein liked, and sometimes participating in the abuse herself. She used her sophisticated charm and social connections to make Epstein's world seem glamorous and safe. The power network. But what truly protected Epstein wasn't just his money or Maxwell's recruitment efforts, it was his connections. Epstein cultivated relationships with an astonishing array of powerful people. Former presidents Bill Clinton and Donald Trump, Britain's Prince Andrew, billionaires like Bill Gates and Leon Black, scientists like Stephen Hawking and Marvin Minsky, lawyers like Alan Dershowitz, politicians like Bill Richardson and George Mitchell. Some of these relationships were purely social, others were financial, and some, according to victim testimony and flight logs, involved trips to Epstein's properties where young women were present. Epstein understood something crucial. In the world of the ultra-wealthy and powerful, relationships are currency. He threw lavish parties, he donated to scientific research and universities. He presented himself as a brilliant mind interested in everything from evolutionary theory to artificial intelligence. And he created leverage. Several victims later testified that they were instructed to have sexual encounters with Epstein's powerful friends. Encounters that may have been secretly recorded. Whether these recordings existed and how Epstein might have used them remains a subject of investigation and speculation. The first fall. The machine nearly came apart in 2005 when the parents of a 14-year-old girl in Palm Beach, Florida, contacted the police. She told them she had been molested at Epstein's mansion after being recruited by another student at her school. The Palm Beach Police Department launched an investigation. They found victim after victim, ultimately identifying more than 30 young women who had been abused at Epstein's Florida estate. The FBI opened a federal investigation. The evidence was overwhelming. But then something extraordinary happened. Despite federal prosecutors preparing a 53-page indictment that could have put Epstein in prison for life, a deal was struck. Alexander Acosta, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida, personally met with Epstein's legal team, which included high-profile attorneys like Alan Dershowitz and Ken Starr. The result was one of the most controversial plea agreements in American legal history. In 2008, Epstein pleaded guilty to 2 state charges, soliciting prostitution from a minor. That's it. He was sentenced to 18 months in county jail, but he was allowed to leave on work release for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. He ended up serving just 13 months, and most importantly, the deal included a non-prosecution agreement that granted immunity to any potential co-conspirators. More than 30 victims were never even told about the agreement until after it was signed, a violation of the Crime Victims' Rights Act. Years later, when asked about the deal, Alexander Acosta reportedly said he was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone. Whether that was true or what it meant has never been fully explained. The Miami Herald investigation. For a decade, Jeffrey Epstein lived quietly. He registered as a sex offender, but his life of luxury continued. The powerful people in his orbit distanced themselves, but many maintained contact. Then, in November 2018, the Miami Herald published a groundbreaking investigation by reporter Julie K. Brown. The series, called Perversion of Justice, revealed the full scope of Epstein's crimes and the sweetheart deal that had protected him. Brown had tracked down dozens of victims, many now adults, willing to tell their stories publicly for the first time. She obtained police reports, court documents, and flight logs. She exposed how Epstein's wealth and connections had corrupted the justice system. The public outcry was immediate and enormous. Arrest and death. On July 6, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was arrested at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey, returning from Paris on his private jet. Federal prosecutors in New York charged him with sex trafficking of minors. This time, there would be no plea deal. Prosecutors made clear they intended to bring the full weight of federal law against him. Epstein was denied bail and held at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan. For his victims, it seemed like justice might finally be served, but they would never get their day in court. On August 10, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was found dead in his cell. The official cause, suicide by hanging. He was 66 years old. The death immediately sparked controversy and conspiracy theories. How could one of the most high-profile prisoners in America, held in a federal facility, die by suicide? The circumstances were troubling. Epstein had been placed on suicide watch after a previous incident but was removed. His cellmate had been transferred. The guards who were supposed to check on him every 30 minutes had fallen asleep and falsified records. The security cameras outside his cell malfunctioned. An autopsy confirmed suicide, but a forensic pathologist hired by Epstein's brother disputed the findings, noting injuries more consistent with strangulation. The FBI and Department of Justice Inspector General investigated, ultimately confirming the official ruling while documenting the perfect storm of screw-ups that allowed it to happen. 2 guards were charged with falsifying records, but later had their charges dismissed after completing community service. For many victims, Epstein's death felt like a final betrayal, the last way he could escape accountability. Ghislaine Maxwell's trial. But the story wasn't over. In July 2020, Ghislaine Maxwell was arrested in New Hampshire, where she had been hiding. She was charged with helping Epstein recruit, groom, and abuse underage girls. Her trial, held in late 2021, became a reckoning. 4 women testified about abuse they suffered as teenagers. They described how Maxwell had made them feel safe, how she had presented Epstein as a mentor and benefactor, how she had groomed them and sometimes participated in the abuse. The defense argued Maxwell was being scapegoated for Epstein's crimes. The prosecution presented her as an essential partner in the enterprise. On December 29, 2021, the jury found Ghislaine Maxwell guilty on 5 of 6 counts, including sex trafficking of minors. In June 2022, she was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. During her trial and sentencing, one question hung over everything. Who else was involved? Who else knew? Who else participated? Unsealing the truth. The court documents that would become known as the Epstein files came from a defamation lawsuit filed by Virginia Giuffre, one of Epstein's victims, against Ghislaine Maxwell in 2015. The case was settled in 2017, but the court filings contained testimony, depositions, and evidence that had been sealed. For years, media organizations and members of the public fought to have these documents released. They argued the public had a right to know the full scope of Epstein's crimes and the powerful people who surrounded him. Finally, in December 2023 and January 2024, a federal judge ordered the release of nearly 1,000 pages of previously sealed documents. The names of dozens of high-profile individuals were revealed. But here's what's crucial to understand. Being named in the documents didn't mean someone was accused of wrongdoing. Many people were mentioned simply because they had flown on Epstein's plane, attended his parties, or been connected to him professionally. The documents included flight logs showing who traveled on Epstein's private jets, nicknamed the Lolita Express. Names included former presidents, celebrities, scientists, and business people. Some trips were clearly innocent. Flights to conferences or business meetings. Others raised questions when young women were listed as passengers. Deposition testimony from victims describing their abuse and naming individuals they encountered at Epstein's properties. Some of these accounts alleged sexual misconduct by prominent figures. Others simply confirmed that certain people had been present. Legal correspondence between Epstein's attorneys and prosecutors, revealing the negotiations that led to his 2008 plea deal. Financial records hinting at the movement of money between Epstein and various associates and businesses. What the files revealed. Some of the most significant revelations from the documents. Prince Andrew. Multiple documents detailed allegations by Virginia Giuffre that she was forced to have sexual encounters with Prince Andrew when she was 17. The prince denied these allegations, but the details in the depositions were specific and damaging. In 2022, Andrew settled a civil lawsuit with Giuffre for a reported $12 to $16 million without admitting guilt. Bill Clinton. Documents confirmed Clinton flew on Epstein's plane multiple times, though Clinton has maintained he never visited Epstein's island and didn't know about his crimes. Victim testimony placed Clinton on the island at least once, though no victims accused Clinton of misconduct. Alan Dershowitz, the prominent attorney who had represented Epstein, was accused by Virginia Giuffre of sexual misconduct. Dershowitz vehemently denied the allegations and countersued Giuffre for defamation. They later settled. Glenn Dubin and Eva Anderson Dubin, the hedge fund billionaire, and his wife, a former Miss Sweden, were named in connection with Epstein. Johanna Sjoberg, another victim, testified she was sent to their home. Jean-Luc Brunel, a French modeling agent who allegedly helped procure young women for Epstein. Brunel was arrested in 2020 and charged with rape of minors. He was found dead in his Paris jail cell in 2022, also ruled a suicide. The documents also revealed the extent of the financial relationships. Billionaire Leon Black paid Epstein at least $158 million for tax and estate planning services between 2012 and 2017, years after Epstein's first conviction. Bill Gates reportedly met with Epstein multiple times to discuss philanthropy, though Gates later said he regretted the relationship. What the files didn't reveal. Despite the massive media coverage, the Epstein files left many questions unanswered. Where did Epstein's money really come from? Beyond his work for Leslie Wexner, his business dealings remain murky. Did he work for intelligence agencies? The comment attributed to Alexander Acosta was never fully explained or verified. Were there recordings or photographs used for blackmail? Victims testified to seeing cameras, but no such material has been found. Who else participated in or enabled the abuse? The documents named many people who were around Epstein, but specific accusations were limited. Where did all the money go? Epstein's estate was worth over $600 million, but tracking all his assets proved complex. The ongoing fight. Today, the impact of the Epstein files continues to unfold. His estate established a victims' compensation fund that has paid out over $125 million to more than 150 survivors. Many victims have said the process brought some closure, though money can never undo the harm they suffered. Several of Epstein's associates have faced legal consequences. Besides Maxwell, others have been sued, investigated, or forced to resign from positions. The documents have ended political careers, damaged reputations, and kept the story in the public consciousness. But for many, the fundamental question remains: how did this happen for so long? How did a man with a history of abuse, operating in plain sight among the world's elite, avoid real consequences for decades? The answer reveals uncomfortable truths about how power protects itself, about how wealth can corrupt justice, about how institutions fail when they defer to influence, about how victims, especially young women from less privileged backgrounds, are disbelieved and dismissed. The Epstein files matter because they're not just about one man's crimes. They're about a system that enabled those crimes. They're about the networks of power that shield abusers. They're about accountability, who gets held responsible and who walks away. In the years since Epstein's death, we've seen echoes of his story in other cases. Powerful men in entertainment, politics, and business exposed for abuse they thought their status would protect. Institutions forced to confront their failures. Victims finding their voices and demanding justice. The files showed us something many suspected, but now can see documented: that wealth and connections really can buy different treatment under the law. That justice isn't blind. It's influenced by who you know and how much you can spend on lawyers. But the files also showed us something else: that truth eventually emerges, that secrets don't stay buried forever, that victims can be heard, that the fight for accountability, even against the most powerful people in the world, is worth having. Conclusion: the Epstein files are still being analyzed, investigated, and debated. New details continue to emerge. More lawsuits are being filed. The full story may never be completely known. But what we do know is enough to understand that Jeffrey Epstein's crimes weren't just individual acts of abuse. They were enabled by a system that values power over justice, connections over accountability, and wealth over truth. The nearly 1,000 pages of documents released in late 2023 and early 2024 didn't just expose one man's criminal enterprise. They exposed how that enterprise was allowed to thrive for decades, protected by money, influence, and a justice system that failed its most vulnerable. For the survivors who fought to have these documents released, who testified despite their trauma, who refused to let this story be buried, the files represent something more than justice denied. They represent truth told, and sometimes that has to be enough. If this story troubles you, it should. If it makes you question how justice works in America, it should. And if it makes you want to support survivors and demand accountability from the powerful, it should do that too. Because the lesson of the Epstein files isn't complicated. No one is above the law. We just have to be willing to enforce it.